Hi, I'm Kaz Roe. In my younger days, I was called Karen Carnell, the daughter of Beryl and Claude Carnell of Playroom fame. My mother and father built and operated that nightclub at Talabudra from 1966 until 1986 when my mother sold it. Not many people know that the Playroom originally started at Currumbin, behind what was then the Currumbin Hotel. The building was not much larger than an old house, and my father entertained with his six-piece band. But that's way before many people remember. Most people remember the Talabudra Playroom for rock and roll, live bands, mud wrestling, wet t-shirt competitions. I remember as a child growing up in what was every kid's dream, fun playhouse. Not only as a kid did we have school parties there, but growing up, of course, I was the most popular teenager at school because it was really cool if your parents owned a nightclub and all your mates used to go to the place. The Playroom at Talabudra was opened in 1966. Johnny O'Keefe was the lead act. Johnny O'Keefe was the performer of his day. Other entertainers that played at the Playroom in those early years were people like Ronrico the Hypnotist, the Maori Five, Freddie Tira, and many of the Maori dance bands. The Playroom was, in those days, a cabaret. So people came in with their eskies, they brought their own alcohol, and they sat down for a meal and watched 5 or 6 floor shows a night, all for a very small price. People from Coolangatta who were staying at the guest houses bussed from Coolangatta to have regular nights at the Playroom. In those late 60s years, it was the top entertainment spot of its time. The Playroom changed in the 70s. My father left my mother. It was a terrible separation. He moved to Brampton Island to become the entertainer, and Beryl took on the running of the Playroom on her own. Well, Beryl is someone who is totally positive and determined. She vowed she would make it a bigger success than it had been, and Beryl did so. She was the first woman licensee in Queensland, so promptly licensing the Playroom meant that there were no more eskies, no more queues, and no one had to bring their own alcohol. This meant a much more vivid revenue stream for the Playroom. She then turned it into what everyone wished was on the Gold Coast in those years, the best rock and roll venue in Australia. It was innovative, creative, and Mum was the most amazing entrepreneur. Full of fun and full of life, the bands loved to play at the Playroom. She set it up perfectly for the bands. Where previously at venues they would have to take their own lights, have crummy sound, Mum put in the best sound system, the best lighting rigs, made access as easy as possible with roller doors directly onto the stage. The trucks just backed up, pulled in, and the roadies were set up in a number of hours. This meant that the Playroom was the #1 venue for every band that was anybody in Australia, and some of those that were huge overseas. I remember as a kid and as a teenager watching the likes of Flowers, who then became Ice House, Radiators, My Sex, Cold Chisel, Thin Lizzy, Boomtown Rats. To promote the Playroom, there was of course the Southern Wall, which was always painted in huge letters with the band that was around. But in the early days, before sound pollution was outlawed on the Gold Coast, we had a little bongo van with speakers on the top and a recording. So another duty that we all loved as children was to drive around in the bongo van from Coolangatta to Southport and play this message over and over and over. Of course, it worked to help promote the Playroom, but we really didn't like to do that job. And in addition to doing that, every time you stopped at a car park, you'd have to put leaflets all over the cars that were in the car parks. The step up from the bongo van was the London red double-decker bus that Mum purchased to be one better, because you always had to have something more innovative. The red double-decker bus was a feature in the Tropicana parade each year. Not so much it was the bus that was the feature, or the fact that the bus had a huge bar in the front and there were lots of very inebriated people hanging out the windows, advertising the Playroom yet again. Bubbles, the bus was called. Beryl is the most optimistic person I ever knew. She was always full of fun, and she would never take no for an answer. If it could be done, she'd find a way to do it. She would always make life fun and encouraged us to do anything. But as a mother, she was rather unconventional. She certainly was different. I'm sure I put her to bed more times than she put me to bed. So if I'm called crazy, it's any wonder I grew up at the Playroom.